or like Democrat first, society second. You see this with black Democrats too. Democrats first, black empowerment second. But the two people that come to mind that scream this example are David Pakman, and I believe his name is Brian Taylor Cohen. But there's others. There's quite a bit. Like there's, you even have people who are kind of on the fence with it. And I don't see how you can be on the fence with it. But an example would be someone like Amazing Lucas. Now, Amazing Lucas, I guess he's still a conservative who's kind of hit the wall with Republicans. And there's a little bit more to that, and I don't really want to go in on Amazing Lucas that much over this. It's, the good thing about Amazing Lucas, if I really have an issue with him, I'll just call his disagreement. He has a disagreement day on his channel. I would call there, and maybe one day I will. And if you've listened to me, you've probably noticed I haven't been a major anti-Zionist. I don't know if I've ever mentioned it on my channel before, but I probably have. I'm pretty sure if I haven't mentioned it there, this isn't an October 7th post thing with me. Like I've mentioned it in other parts of social media. I think I told the story where I met a Semitic Ethiopian who was in trouble with his school for saying anti-Semitic shit. And he was saying it was just like, this was plain anti-Zionist stuff. And this was, this was years ago. This was like probably 2018, I'm guessing. Kind of a loose guess. Might have been before that. As a reparationist, I don't see how you can expect political movement from people who are comfortable in a caste system. Within the anti-Zionist movement, I'm noticing an overlap where there are reparationists. They might not mention it a lot, but they've mentioned it. Like someone like Ian Blakely or Blakely, they are pro-reparations, and they have said it. Another person who's also anti-Zionist, who's pro-reparations, who I think would make a great president, even though a lot of people get stuck in the media and they're making good money for themselves. And I'm going to go back to him in this discussion, and is Hassan Piker. I think Hassan Piker, right now, he'd be my vote for U.S. president. Fox News is already attacking him as somebody who is anti-Semitic, and I think that term itself is anti-Semitic. Because if you're only using that term for one Semitic people, what about the other Semitic people? And it's a lot of times it's used against Semitic people. So just within that, and especially when you consider a lot of Ashkenazi Jews, I'd say the majority of Ashkenazi Jews, they come from a huge gap. Really, God, all of them, where they weren't speaking a Semitic language. And I'd argue, if I were to debate, I'd debate anybody that the bulk of their ancestry, the fundamental aspects of their ancestry, is Southeastern European. Now, some would say the whole Turk thing, Turkey and like, let's say, is it Cyprus? Cyprus, they call themselves Cypriots instead of Cyprians, but Cyprus is supposedly Asia. I would say that Ashkenazi, when, somebody who's kind of an ancestry, population genetics junkie, maybe not as big as someone like, I wish I would have brought this up with him. I don't know if he would have wanted to go there when I had asked him on the channel. But maybe I haven't read as many studies as he has. But I've read enough to where I can make an educated statement on the subject. And honestly, I would debate anybody on the planet on the subject because, educate me. And I think there is a stalemate that opens up a lane for people to say that they descend from Israel, Jerusalem, whatever. But with that same lane, you can be a Hebrew Israelite and make the same case. Because if I would position you ancestry-wise between Cyprus and Malta, which is water. So, and that's where you are with PCAs and admixture, and comparing to older populations, that's who you typically cluster with, like somewhere between Cyprus, Malta. Then you have Sephardic Jews, North Africans, not necessarily I would say like just North Central Africans, maybe some Northeast, but and they're generally kind of far from Egypt and other North Africans. So it's even hard to say that. Ashkenazi in some way are alone. I've seen them overlap Maltese and Cypriots, Maltesians, or Maltats. I don't know how you say that, but they're never clustered tight with Levant people, and their bulk ancestry, and maybe you could say this is also true with Levant people and North Africans, is they have a lot, damn near all of European and West Asian genes, especially European. Like people like the Sahrawi. So with that in mind, one thing I've noticed, even like these people like David Pacman, and I think it's Brian Taylor Cohen. Let me make sure Brian Taylor Cohen. But even some people who aren't Jewish, and I don't, there's a lot of real anti-Zionist Jews, like Sam Cedar, Jill Stein, who I voted for. So it's, I'm not trying to put people who practice Judaism over my lap and pat them on the hiney. Because there's some people that just, for whatever reason, they have their principles value, maybe to a degree, Trump derangement. And I don't see what could be more aggravating that Trump is doing besides taking the baton from Joe Biden. And if I'm going to talk about Joe Biden and this baton, it's in relation to the genocide. And you can go back, and recently someone from Biden's cabinet said that the whole thing about working tirelessly for a ceasefire was BS. And I knew it was BS. I didn't have anybody had to tell me, because if they wanted a ceasefire, all they had to do was threaten to bomb Israel. Like, stop doing it or else we're going to bomb you and call you out for being the axis of evil. And that the easier thing would be to just say, hey, do what Reagan did. I'm in the Sam Cedar camp. And this is when I would talk about how beyond these people who next to never even mention what's going on. And who, if I'm not talking about the two people I already gave examples of, Pacman and Cohen, because it's a lot of them. It's whenever you see someone who is just nonstop anti-Trump, nonstop pro-Democrat, will call out racism but never talk about reparations. They're not solution-oriented. They're maybe uncomfortable in a caste system, but not uncomfortable to hammer out a solution and come with a solution. And that's who I'm talking about. There's so many of them. It's too many of them to name. And these people are aggravating to me. That's why I'm happy Trump won. If you're going to have someone like Biden who says he's a Zionist, supports genocide, is anti-black when it matters, then I'd rather it be Trump, and at least people who are more centrist or liberal are going to pay attention more beyond the people I'm naming, like even someone like Dollemore, who I was forgetting. But beyond that, I've noticed people like I want to be specific. One of them is Ethan Klein, and I'll get to him last before I wrap this up. But another one is somebody who was interviewed by I think he's a British columnist who he's also an anti-Zion, Owen Jones. But he's still someone who I would say he's a careful anti-Zion. Like, he's somebody, like, if I said threaten to bomb him, he go, oh, really, that far? Like, why not? But, I don't really have any criticism of Owen Jones. He's not an American, so I hold him to a different standard when it comes to politics, whatever. But he was interviewing Shaiel ben Ephraim. Shaiel ben Ephraim is a Zionist who, this was kind of interesting. It was an interesting interview, especially the way Ben Ephraim changed his stance at the very end. So if you look up this interview, if you look up their names, it's easy to find. Watch the whole thing. Don't half watch it, because he really changes and puts more responsibility on Israel for what's going on than he does at the beginning. He's both sides in it. And I always want to call him Owen Wilson, like the actor, but Owen Jones calls him out for the whole both sides and stuff, and talks about who has more power. And I think eventually Ben Ephraim agreed, but he's a Zionist, but in a lot of ways his politics are anti-Zionist. At least he believes there needs to be a restructure. And towards the end, I start to agree with him to the point where I'm like, I guess I could agree with the parameters of a one-state solution with this fella, except for he doesn't mention one key thing. And for people who are listening to this, like if you're reparationists and you know black people need to be about black empowerment in America because we don't have the power to really influence shit outside of America, well, this is where I'm seeing some intersectionality. Well, also, like I said, I think in general, people who are uncomfortable with the caste system are going to be uncomfortable with genocide, and you're going to have your I Am Blackleys, if I'm pronouncing their name right. I'm pretty good at not misgendering I Am Blackley, but this dude, Shaiel Ben Ephraim, that's a cool ass name. So the dude was a Zionist, but like when he starts talking about solutions, he leaves out reparations for Palestinians. He even talks about sanctions on Israel, throwing their military leaders and Milikowski, aka Netanyahu, in prison. Like, he gets pretty buck near the end of that conversation, but he never talks about the way to trust that there won't be retaliation from Palestinians. And it's amazing they never talk about this, because outside of like arresting Nazis, you don't really see a lot of or has there been any retaliation on the Holocaust, where outside of like the U.S., including, a lot of our ancestors fought in that war, but there isn't an ongoing thing. And part of it is they agreed to be shipped out of their homes. And I can kind of understand after what happened. I'm not a Holocaust denier. I think maybe the numbers might be off, but maybe they're not off. I don't know. I haven't done that research, so I don't say. But they've gotten reparations, and they're on great terms with what's going on, the current genocide. They're on great terms with Germany. Germany is like, if you call out the amount of people they're killing, maybe you're anti-Semitic. Like, the fuck are you to call somebody anti-Semitic? But that's what's going on. And amazingly, like, he went all the way to the punitive stuff, which, especially a person who still says he's a Zionist, that's a hell of a step. But the step to long-term peace, and when Ethan Klein debated Sam Cedar brought it up, is you have to empower Palestinians to the point where there is no purpose in being militant. Like, what's the purpose in Jews being anti-German militant? They're empowered. They don't even talk like that. Somebody, oh God, I've heard, anti-Zionist, what was his name? He was the dude that almost had Candace Owens in tears. It was, God, who is that? I should just pull up that video. It was Norman Finkelstein. And Norman Finkelstein, his parents were in the Holocaust. I guess they survived to where they could tell him, like, how much they hated Germans. It's the only time I've heard anybody recently talk about hating Germans. And part of the reason he's an anti-Zionist is he understands, like, the oppressor hating the oppressed, hating the oppressor. Candace Owens was in tears. Like, they just didn't fall out of her face, but her eyes were watery. Like, I don't like Candace Owens. This bitch has argued against reparations with lies, talking about how Japanese didn't get reparations in America. But it was legit emotion. I'm not going to take that from her. It was real emotion. And she's an idiot. But, at least she has a heart. I don't understand the hate. Yeah, you got like your Richie Tauruses or who are bought and paid. That's most of Congress, man. AIPAC broke Trump off $250 million. It's a lot of money. So yeah, they're paid to hate Palestinians, but being paid to hate people, that's guttural. You talk about like why I don't see America as a Christian country, and it'll never be a Christian country, is it's not based on anything. To the point where I could just buy you up like Candace Owens was bought to be anti-black. I can buy up our Congress and our presidents to be anti-Palestinian, when Palestinians in the entire context of this have never been in position where I could ever speak ill of their militancy. Now, if they were getting reparations and there was a right to return land deal and they had equal rights on every drop of soil that is New Canaan, whether you have Israel's territory or Palestine or whatever, if they had that deal, which is better than any of their leaders have ever tried to broker, if they had that and they still were attacking people, it would be easy for me to condemn Hamas, like if I'm on Piers Morgan. But if Piers Morgan were to have ever asked me at any point to condemn Hamas, I would tell him to condemn these nuts. Fuck you. But the thing I want to bring up before I get to Ethan Klein with Ben Ephraim is one of the reasons why he was supporting Israel early on in their attacks on Gaza. And this is what I mean if I ever say that there's a psychosis, there's a guttural sickness among the Zionists, is now this dude said when people early on were talking about the children being killed, and this is why I don't like talking about, trying to shame people about Palestinian children being killed, because our government is paid to hate Palestinians, give a damn how old they are. I'd rather talk about you're killing Palestinian men and now all this shit you talk about how you have a lack of marriage in the black family and that causes violence. So now you want to kill up a bunch of fathers? I'd rather call out that hypocrisy, because I understand that a lot of these people, if they really cared, like I think it was Golda Meir, I don't know how to pronounce her fake name. Really, both the names are fake, these trans Semitic people. But she was, I think, if they have prime ministers or presidents, I think they're prime minister, let me check. But she blamed Israel killing, she was the prime minister. She blamed Israel killing Palestinian children on the Palestinians themselves. Now, think about how sick this is, dude. If, let's say I'm in a war or like even a gang war and there's casualty. If I'm attacking and in the process I quote unquote accidentally kill a child, this will go on forever if I don't take responsibility for the accident. I can't blame my opponent. Like, it's just that irresponsible, like, to blame, like, you're in a mutual, according to you. Now, I'd look at this historically, and I would say when, 1897, you're looking at the Berlin Conference and how they're colonizing Africa. We're going to colonize Palestine, too, because the Berlin Conference was before that. So, like, you aren't pulled into something where you have to throw punches willy-nilly and you accidentally scratch somebody. No, you have control over this. Take responsibility. But that irresponsibility, man, it's to the point where Owen Jones, you were tweeting all of this pro-Israel and pro their actions and after October 7th. And in Ben Ephraim's response to this, and he says he still believes it, was that the reason why he was doing it is he thought that, this is kind of hard to say, and I was thinking about playing the video, but you'd have to hear it yourself. It's maybe in the first 30% of it. Actually, I think I can explain. See, back in the days, medieval times, like, this is where some of the Borat stereotypes come from. Like, if you ever listened to Borat, watch Borat, he's a Jewish dude. He's a Cohen, Sacha Baron Cohen. He has like the priest name. And that's the thing. If you go back 800 years, you start to see some Levant ancestry from Ashkenazi. You start to see it with African Americans. If you want to have that religious thing going and you have like, I think that's a real connection name. Like that may be where a lot of that ancestry comes from. If you go back 800 or so years, you don't see it before then. Like Ashkenazi will be 100% European. The African amongst African American, you might have some North African, you might have some East African, but you typically don't have Levant. Go back 800 years and you might get a scrape of Levant here and there, a couple percent. Like I can vouch for that because I took one of the few DNA tests that tries to go back that far, the GPS ancestry test. But let me get back on track. He was, and actually Owen Jones explained like what this whole blood libel thing is. In medieval time, when you had like the Horned Jew and the, like a lot of this, racist stuff against the really, I would argue, fellow white people in medieval times. And when you really start to have, the whole Heb thing and anti-Hebrew, and then that's where anti-Semitic made sense. It makes sense in a European nation where it's like everybody's Indo-European and so are the Jews, but they identify with Semitic languages. And even though Hebrew was a dead language, it was still used sparsely here and there. They would accuse Jews of killing children, drink their blood, and just really sicko shit like that. You might have had a crazy person here and there. You have crazy people within all groups, but they weren't doing this shit. They weren't going around killing children. But somehow Shaiel ben Ephraim had internalized this medieval stereotype to the point where when people were saying that you're killing children, talking about like, now maybe it wasn't right after October 7th, but we're talking still 2023. You're killing children. I'm seeing images. He's saying that these people are anti-Semitic using these old blood libel tropes. And that's why he supported Israel early on. I thought that was incredible. I can't relate to that. You know, there's some old black stereotypes, watermelon and shit like that, but they aren't that old. We talking about medieval times. Like you went back to medieval times over something that, like, you gotta let that go because that shit wasn't true. If that was true, if you really had that happening, it would be a bigger part in history. And I'm not saying there aren't crazy people who did it, but a lot of this was Jews are really concerned about Jewish hatred. And I think they should just focus on Jewish hatred and stop hijacking all of the Semitic people out there, especially considering what they're doing to Semitic people, and focus on like resolving Jewish hatred, because that exists. There's people that on Twitter that they hate Jews almost as much as they hate Palestinians. But the difference is we're talking people on Twitter, X. We're talking people in different parts of social media. We're not talking about the president, his cabinet, Congress, the previous president, Kamala, and people want to give her a pass. Well, she wasn't the president. Come on now. It would have been piss easy to say, hey, I'm not going to follow the policies. I'm going to at least have an arms embargo on Israel. And that's what I mean. I'm not trying to pathologize. I'm just trying to say that you have people who might not be Zionists who just ignore the shit and will get mad. Some of them but much as Shaiel ben Ephraim demonstrated, with that interview / debate, because it got kind of contentious at times, but he demonstrated that, like MLK said, a lot of white folks, they ain't got no sense. They've demonstrated eloquently that they don't have no sense. It doesn't compare to, as people say, the mental gymnastics of Ethan Klein. His debates with Sam Cedar, who actually had a solution. I don't know if they got to any sort of solution when he had a debate with Hassan Piker, who should be our president if we were a just country or a real Christian. And not to say that Hassan Piker is a Christian. I don't know or care what religion, but He's a humanist, moral person. He's also pro-reparations, not comfortable in a caste system. He'd get my vote over damn near all of these idiots who are thought of as potential candidates for both parties. I hope he gets out. He stops streaming. He can still stream as a president. It'd be fun to go on Twitch and watch him play some Assassin's Creed and take out Milikowski. Well, take out the war criminal. Hell, if Shaiel was agreeing that that's what needs to be done. And I think that would probably, that would, and you know what? Here's the thing, I'm not even going to say I lost my train of thought. Let me regroup before I even get to where I'm going, because this is in the direction of where I'm going. Ethan Klein agrees that Israel is committing genocide, that the IDF is a terrorist organization, yet his huggabaloo, whatever they call it, is his mindset and his victim mentality is even stronger than Shaiel ben Ephraim, who is concerned about stereotypes from medieval time. He had a theory that because, and back when him and Hassan Piker were buddies, they've had the traditional ego fallout. Even though I gotta say, Hassan Piker, for someone who is as wealthy as he is, as good as at what he does as he is, people are like, it's not a real job. Streaming, if you do it well and you make that much money, you do it well, it's a real job. I ain't gonna knock somebody for bringing in their coins. But when they did have an ego fallout, and I think most of the ego and the paranoia and the victim mentality, pretty much all of it looks like, was coming from Ethan. But they knew or kind of joked that Hassan Piker had a sword, and he has a sword collection. He has 10 swords. This came out in the debate. I'm not that big of a Hassan Piker fan to where I even knew it. He had one sword. Yeah, and I'm kind of Hassan Piker fan. The same reason I'm a Saramotep fan. To me, I see integrity where it's lacking with a lot of people, and that's one of the reasons why I think they have a lot of haters. Is haters that rarely step to them, like, hey, this is my issue. And if you aren't stepping to people, that's really what makes a hater. You can have a disagreement, disagree about this, hashtag, whatever. I've had maybe one little disagreement with the Saramotep. That was a while ago when he was with the Amon Ra Squad. And that's how I am too. I'm just going to tell you straight up, we're not supposed to agree on everything anyway. But they both knew about this sword that had a hilt in his collection, that the hilt, when you're looking at it from a certain angle, it really looks like a swastika. It's a Japanese sword, I believe, and it's not a swastika. They knew it wasn't a swastika. But so they kind of joked around Nazi sword. Big deal. I don't care. Yeah. I grew up around Jewish kids. That is a joke, like that's kind of a realistic joke that people might have, the Nazi sword. So I don't know this story exactly because this is being not told, but you're getting the clues of it in their discussion when Ethan Klein accuses Hassan Piker of using this sword in one of his videos where he was refuting Ethan Klein as a dog whistle. And you can tell, it wasn't like, let's say the whole video was Hassan Piker talking about Ethan Klein while he's holding this sword like he's Conan at the end of the movie. It wasn't like that. It wasn't even Hassan holding the sword. It was maybe his editor or whatever, and it wasn't like, I don't even know how long he even held it. I don't think it was long at all. And I'm like, dude, this is even crazier than the blood libel thing. Because yeah, there are people who will push around old stereotypes. There's people who hate Jews. The blood libel thing, at least it's plausible to me. I think it's insane to assume this when people are pointing to real images of children being killed. And it's a mental block that I hope Shaiel ben Ephraim, especially someone who may be still a Zionist, but at least in terms of the punitive aspects, is closer to a peaceful solution. Maybe he can wrestle with this and win and realize that this is something that you can let go of. But, if you're stuck on the goddamn Nazi sword, the swastika sword, as a dog whistle, and you already agreed that there's a genocide going on, and here's the thing, like, Ethan Klein can't hash out a solution because Sam Cedar gave him one. It was that debate where Sam Cedar, like, he asked Sam Cedar what Israel should have done after October 7th, and Sam Cedar was like, you can have your tactical hits at whoever organizes, but you have to empower Palestinians. And Ethan Klein was completely tone deaf, non-receptive to it. And I'm like, dude, to me, that's where he just really became somebody who's destined to just be an internet troll. Like, if there's no way you can have a solution, then what is there? Well, and it wasn't just the whole Nazi sword thing. His whole tactic in this debate was to kind of agree that there's a genocide going on, but then to go through whatever lengths he can to do gotchas on Hassan Piker hating Jews secretly. And this is what I mean. Like, Black Americans have been through a conveyor belt of human rights violations. Like, I use that often, or I'll say a biblical gauntlet of human rights violations. It's difficult to name them all. It's an incalculable amount in terms of damages. But I've never seen people who are sane enough to make a living in social media have anything close to this level of a victim mentality. If anything, we're too far in the opposite direction, where you got all of these people who are grifting racists arguing that we shouldn't have reparations. We're too far in that direction. But even the ones like myself who are reparationists, I can't imagine this level of victim mentality. Part of the reason I'm a reparationist is I want to not have any victim mentality. And nothing destroys a victim mentality, in theory, because like Ashkenazi have gotten reparations, but I'm like, this isn't a populist thing, but it's a power thing. Yeah, I think there's a populist issue with Zionism, but even someone who's this close to a solution as Shaiel ben Ephraim, or someone like Ethan Klein, who agrees that Israel's committing genocide and probably wouldn't be against some of the punitive measures that Shaiel ben Ephraim suggested, their victim mentality and their use of anti-Semitism, which I would say is an anti-Semitic word in itself, and I normally don't like to even say that because it's not helpful when a lot of times people are just trying to express a real hate that people have of Jews. It's not helpful to say, well, to put on your smarty pants hat and say, but it's not even a real word. And I'm like, but at this point, when there's this much hate for Semitic people, then we got to call this word out for being racist and stop using it. We need to stop using the term anti-Semitic, because the main people that have experienced hate and the cost of hate and the dehumanization and the niggerization are Palestinians. The main Semitic people, at least, especially now with Trump, and Trump is an asset for Israel. And I say especially, but so is Biden. He is a proud Zionist. And it's not like I'm seeing in colleges Jewish people getting beaten. A lot of the protesters are Jewish themselves, and they're not like they're not hating on Judaism through being anti-Zionist. But man, that I would suggest if like for whatever reason you want to hear more about this or watch these debates, I really like Bad Empanada's breakdown on Ethan Klein. And I don't know what's wrong with that. Like he's a scary example of someone who just tried to use gotchas against Hassan Piker and seemed to think it was working better than it was, but it was really just revealing that he's got issues, man. And I get that just because you get reparations, it's not going to end hate. Just because you have power, just because you own our government, and I'm not talking about just, obviously some Jew living in Algeria doesn't have any power over Trump. I'm not talking about that. But having that much world stage power isn't going to mean people are going to not plot and not push propaganda, and that you can't be concerned, that you can never lower your guard against whatever type of anti-Jewish hatred there is. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that this is a step beyond that, that there is a branch psychosis amongst people who have way too much influence. Because Shaiel was getting a bunch of retweets based on some sick psychosis, because ain't nobody give a damn like that about, like, the people who were concerned about Palestinians dying, they weren't thinking about some medieval tropes. Hassan Piker's editor or buddy or whatever who had the sword was not trying to send a behead Jews dog whistle. So, hey, MLK had it right. A lot of white folks have demonstrated eloquently that they ain't got no sense.